So this is our second video from chapter 11, section 3, and it's still dealing with solving radical equations. However, the reason I broke them up into two different videos and two different assignments is now, if you notice, there is a operation underneath the radical along with the variable. The same rules still apply from the last video, so if you need to double check what to do when there is a square root of something, how to undo that, please watch my first solving radical equations video and then come back to this lesson. But to get moving forward, what we're going to do with this lesson is first remove anything outside of the radical like we did in the last video. So the first thing I want to move is plus 7, and the inverse of plus 7 is minus 7 from both sides. So we're then left with the square root of all of x minus 5 is equal to 5. So 12 minus 7. That doesn't look like a good 7, so that is meant to be 12 minus 7. Now that you're stuck here, the same thing we did in the last video. To remove a square root, you have to square both sides or raise both sides to the second power. So what we're really doing is just saying, well, this whole radical is going to be risen to the second power, and we're going to raise 5 to the second power. The square root and the squaring of the square root cancels each other out. So now we're left with x minus 5 is equal to 25. So nothing fancy has to happen when you square an entire operation underneath the radical. It just removes it when you raise it to the second power. And then to finish off the question, what's the opposite of minus 5? Plus 5. Plus 5. And we are left with x is equal to 30. The same concept is going to follow through in number 2. So we're going to remove whatever's on the outside of the radical first. Always start with undoing addition and subtraction. So that's why we're going to start with subtracting 12 on both sides. And we're going to be left with 4 times the radical of x minus 7 is equal to 16. And then we're going to divide by 4 on both sides, since this is saying 4 times the radical of x minus 7. And then we are left with the square root of x minus 7 equals 4. And then the last, or part of the last step, is we're going to square both sides like we did in number 1. So we're going to square all of x minus 7 to cancel out the square root, and we're going to square 4 as well. And I'm just going to write the work next to this. We're going to be left with x minus 7 equals 16. And now the last step is to undo the subtraction. So we're going to add 7. And our final answer is going to be x is equal to 23. So don't be hesitant to square a radical even though there's an expression underneath it. The last two questions that we're going to practice is what happens if there's a radical on both sides of the equation, or two radicals in the same side. All of them, when there is more than one radical, you want one on either side of the equal sign. So what's the first step to get rid of the square root? Because we can't move anything underneath the radical from either side, and there's nothing outside of the radicals, we're going to square both sides of the equation, because squaring cancels out radicals. So now when I square the square root of x plus 4, I canceled it out, and I'm left with x plus 4. What happens on the right when I square the square root of 2x minus 1? I canceled it out, and I'm left with 2x minus 1. And now we're just left with a multi-step equation that we practiced around December. So it doesn't matter what you start with. I'm probably going to move x to the right-hand side first. So to move a positive x, we subtract it. And we're going to be left with 4 is equal to x minus 1. And then the last step is to move all of the numbers to the left side. So we're going to add 1 on both sides of the equation. And our final answer is going to be x is equal to 5. There you go. For number 4, just watch closely. When there is a radical with 2 of them on one side of the equation, there's nothing we can do to combine them, because if you remember to one of the last videos in 11.2, you can only add radicals together that have the same expression underneath the radical symbol. So I want to create this into a problem like number 3. I want radicals on 2 sides of the equation. How do I do that? Move one of them to the right side, and I'm going to move the negative square root of x to the right by adding the square root of x. Cancels out. Add the square root of x. And now we are going to be left with the square root of 4x minus 3 equals the square root of x. And how do I get rid of the square roots? We are going to square both of them. So when I square all of this, and I'm going to put parentheses around it since there's a bunch going on, the square roots are canceled out, and we have 4x minus 3 equals x. And then we're going to move the variables in the only direction that we can because there's no other integers. So we're going to subtract 4x from both sides. Cancels out. And I'm running out of room, so I'm going to write it next to it. We're going to have negative 3 is equal to negative 3x. And the last step to get x by itself is we're going to divide by negative 3 on both sides. And we're going to be left with x is equal to positive 1. There you have it.